Judith Ann Neelley is a murderer, kidnapper, and rapist with two victims on September 28, 1982 and October 4, 1982. Her victims would include 13-year-old Lisa Ann Millican, 22-year-old Janice K. Chatman, by shooting in Alabama and Georgia. On April 18, 1983, she was sentenced to death in Alabama, excuse me. On January 15, 1999, she was sentenced to life in prison. Welcome to the fourth episode of season 4 on the True Crime Lounge. This episode is set to come out on May 28, 2024. If you are a Patreon member, then you have early access to this episode. I also have a merch shop that you can go check out as well. For any updates on my channel and podcast, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Now, let's dive into today's episode, shall we? Alvin Howard Neelley and Judith Ann Adams Neelley are a couple that I have managed to come across. If you go back to the first episode, then you can go back and watch Alabama's murderers Linda Block and George Sibley Jr. They are an American couple that was responsible for two murders, and they will be convicted of murder and kidnapping of Lisa Ann Milligan and Janice Sherman. Judith Neelley was sentenced to death by the state of Alabama in 1983. She is now serving her sentence at Tutwiler in Wetumpka, Alabama. Alvin Neelley was serving a life sentence at Bosnick State Prison in Hardwick, Georgia until his death in 2003. Alvin Neelley was born Alvin Howard Neelley Jr. and was born in Georgia in 1953, where he was a car thief during his teenage years. He met his second wife, Judith Ann Adams, when he was 26 and she was only 15. He divorced his first wife shortly before eloping in 1980. Judith Ann Neelley was born in Murfreesboro in 1964, and her father, an alcoholic, died when she was 9. After meeting Alvin Neelley, she began her life of crime, committing armed robbery across the country, for which she was later caught. She gave birth to twins while incarcerated at Rome's Youth Development Center. On September 11, 1982, a Youth Development Center employee, Ken Dooley's home was shot through 4 times. The following day, fellow employee Linda Adele's home was fire-burned with a Molotov cocktail, and phone calls were made to the victims following the attacks by a female who claimed to have been sexually abused at a youth development center, but neither victim could confirm the caller's voice. Lisa Ann Millican was a 15-year-old girl in Cedartown, Georgia, when she was abducted by Alvin and Judith from the Riverbend Mall in Rome. On September 25, 1982, she was taken to Murfreesboro motel, where the Neellys held her captive during captivity. Lisa was molested by both Neellys, and Judith injected her with Adreno. On the 28th, Lisa was shot in the head by Judith, and her body was laid thrown in the Little River Canyon in Fort Payne, Alabama. Judith even called the police to report Lisa's body. Janice Chatman and John Hancock were a young engaged couple from Rome. On October 4, 1982, they were abducted by Judith Neelley. John Hancock is shot while Janice Chatman was abducted and brought back to Neelley's motel room, where she was tortured and murdered. John Hancock, however, did not die and was able to point to Alvin and Judith Neelley as their assailants. Judith Neelley was arrested on October 9, 1982, and Alvin was taken into custody a few days later. Judith was deduced as being a perpetrator in the YDC employee attacks. To avoid the death penalty, Alvin pled guilty to murder and aggravated assault in Georgia. He was not tried for the Lisa Milligan murder. Judith Neelley's trial began March 7, 1982, and during her trial, she gave birth to a third child behind bars, a 6 week, and after a 6-week trial, Judith was convicted of torture murder of Lisa Ann Milligan. Despite a jury's recommendation to a sentence to Judith life in prison, the judge sentenced the 18-year-old mother of three to Alabama's electric chair. Following the first conviction, Judith pled guilty to Janice Chatman's murder. Judith became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the United States. She was on Alabama's death row Tutwiler, and she appealed for a new trial but was denied in 1989. And the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed the death sentence on January 15, 1999. And Judith was days from her execution in Alabama when the governor um, Rob James granted clemency, commuting her death to life in prison. The decision was met with controversy, but James cited how Judith's jury wanted her sentenced to have life in prison, but the judge sentenced her to death. She will be eligible for parole. She was eligible for parole in January 2014. In the media, so on February 24th, 2008, the Neelley's case was profiled on Investigation Discovery's program Most Evil on a scale developed in the forensic psychologist Michael Stone. Judith was ranked a category 22 killer, the most evil, level D for serial torture murderers. On October 23rd, 2008, Alvin and Judith Neelley were featured in the Wicked Attraction episode Hearts of Darkness. Judith was featured in Deadly Women in 2011. You might find something this story familiar, even though you never came across this in the vast reading. In the last 5 years, the attention has been drawn to women's capacity for evil, most spectacularly by a sordid case of, you guessed it, the Barbie doll killers. You know this one, Paul Homolka and Paul Minardo. But Carla wasn't the first of her kind, and a few decades before she and Bernardo undertook their well-documented spree of torture and murder, Alvin and Judith were having a little spree of their own. The similarities in both cases, both couples and teenagers worked as teams. Um, they both. I lost my spot. I'm sorry. Okay, Alvin and Judith were having a little killing spree of their own. Their similarities between the two cases are striking. Both couples had teenage victims. Both worked as victims, as teams of abduction and sexual abuse. When they found out immediately, they turned against each other. Both cases resulted in in this whole he said she said trial. So why was Judith sentenced to death sentenced to death in Alabama in 1983, and at the age of 18 as the youngest woman ever to be sentenced. The murder for her trial, which she was tried and convicted, protracted and cruel, but Judy was a poor, common girl from the deep South, a product of both a troubled home and a juvenile justice justice system. So when the victim for whose murder she was convicted 13-year-old Lisa Milligan. Lisa was killed in DeKalb County, Alabama, a rural mountainous area who is the county seat of Fort Payne where the trial was held, and a population of 12,000 or so. Unlike Carla and Paul, the Neellys didn't videotape their assaults, such as the convenient space age toys as camcorders were not widely available in 1982. No crew from the courtroom TV covered their trial, and as the network didn't exist at the time, the Neellys was located in a local news, mainly good for a lot of gossip in Fort Payne and a lot of coverage for bigger Alabama papers. Time for a short, sad life. Had the location of Lisa Milligan's body not been brought to the attention of the DeKalb County authorities, she may have remained undiscovered for years. It was a it was 85 feet drop fl- from the floor of the Little River Canyon, and Lisa's body had landed, and the area was densely wooded, and the area had been a garbage dump for locals. Lisa was last seen in Rome, Georgia, and the search for her was focused some 35 miles away. In fact, the Rome police and the Rome radio station had each received telephone calls revealing the locations of the body, and the Rome police had the area indicated in the calls, but found nothing. On the evening of September 29th, 1982, a call came into the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department, and then the unidentified caller, Judith Neelley herself, who had also made the calls to Rome, gave the detailed directions to the location of the young girl's body. That night, a beam of light, flashlight, Deputy James Mays and other lawmen around the county found Lisa Milligan. She had been shot and lay crumpled in over a fallen tree. She was brought out of the canyon and by a rope, and the following day, investigators found 3 syringes among the debris in which she had fallen. Hanging from a branch between that and the canyon floor, they found a pair of woman's blue jeans and a pair of blood stains. Because the crime scene contained a lot of garbage from previous visitors, authorities were not certain those were relevant in the case, but delivered them to Alabama Department of Forensic Science in Huntsville in hopes of a lead. The thoughts that Lisa was found in DeKalb County, investigators quickly decided that since she had disappeared in Rome, that they would work from there. The police in Rome had been investigating Lisa's disappearance for several days, even since she had gone missing from the Riverbend Mall. And on September 25th, Lisa had been part of a group of girls from Ethel Harf's home in Cedartown, Georgia, in which she had gone unsupervised outing in the mall. The Harf's home was a facility for troubled girls and initially hoped that Lisa would have simply ran away. She had a history of doing this. But as days would pass, Lisa didn't return home to any of her usual haunts, and hope faded. And while it is tragic, it didn't come as a shock when she was found dead. This case would eventually get assigned to Detective Kenneth Hines, who quickly found that Lisa's short life had been filled with shady characters and near Newells, and she was from Lafayette, Georgia, and her family and had been removed from her parents' home, as had her 3 siblings, following allegations of sexual abuse. She had been placed and removed from 4 different foster homes and spent 30 days at the open door home before she had landed in a Hearth home. She was sexually precocious and unpopular with other girls in the various facilities where she found herself. She had once kicked another girl in the stomach hard enough to induce a miscarriage. Connors conducted numerous interviews with Lisa's family and acquaintances and emerged with a vivid picture of her sad short life. But that moved that the investigation forward. Unpopular as she was, she hadn't had any enemies in motivation were about to do it. Her family had neglected and abused her, but Kleins knew they weren't her killers. Her best leads, he knew, were the phone calls revealing the location of Lisa's body. The call to the Rome Police Department had been taped, and wow, it was for Mike Jones of the Walker County Department of Family and Children's Services. Kynes got important information. saying, "Y'all look for Lisa and Milligan on the run from the Hart's home," the callers had said. Jones latched onto the term on run immediately. In this, and most people refer to as runaways, he told Times, on run was an insider's expression common among the denizens of the juvenile justice system. So he pulled up, so in the caller Jones surmised, probably had a juvenile record. A dramatic scene took place when Kynes played a tape for 13-year-old Debbie Smith, a local girl who had approached and been offered a ride by a woman in a brown car October 4th. As the tape plays, John Hancock, who was abducted with Janice K. Chatman on October 4th, passed by the room, and he stopped whenever he heard the voice. And he exclaimed, "That's the damn woman that shot me." Initially, John Hancock's story had been seen too bizarre to believe. He told police that he and Janice had been walking in the evening, October 4th, and had accepted a ride from a woman in a brown Dodge. The woman said she was lonely and wanted to talk during the ride and made contact with the CB radio with a man with the handle of Night Rider. The woman identified herself as Lady Sundown, and they eventually converged on a dirt road in Rome. Night Rider drove a red car, and had two children with them, and Hancock was instructed to switch cars with them. Leaving Chatman in the car with Lady Sundown, Hancock felt uneasy now, but not overtly threatened. Both res- both both cars resumed their natural course north, and eventually ending up in Alabama and back. When they stopped again, Hancock was instructed to walk down the road from the cars. Lady Sundown shot him in the back, and he had lain beside the road for a while until he was sure it was safe for him to find help. They disappeared with Chapman, and he hadn't seen her since. It wasn't until she identified herself on the voice of the Kynes tape of the Lady Sundown that was believed to be investigators believed Hancock's strange story. Now, though they trusted him, he identified the types of cars as Night Rider and Lady Sundown had driven, and that they had been taking Millican's. And while that didn't crack Millican's case, to Kynes it seemed like the right direction. This would give him a solid suspect. All the talk of anonymous telephone um, tipsters, have piqued the interest of others in Rome's law enforcement community. Bill Witter of the Floyd County Sheriff's Department told Clines his agency was investigating the insistent female caller in the case was involved in fire burning. Two employees of the Rome's Youth Department Center, Linda Adair and Ken Dooley, ran incidents in their homes on their successive nights. Someone on Dooley's house on September 11th in a Love cocktail was tossed into Adair's driveway September 12th. No one was injured, though the police were investigating the scene at Adair's home. She received a phone call from an anonymous female who referred to the shooting at the Dooley's house and claimed a fire burning and said, "You both will die before the night's over." A second call came to the sheriff's office for the a while later, and for the abuse I look, the caller said, "They are both gonna die." As Kynes listened to the Witter account, he made a connection. The YDC was a juvenile facility. Mike Jones was the Walker County's DFACS and had told him to call on Milligan tape, probably as a juvenile record. Now he has something to pursue. Remembering that Hancock said his abductors bore an out-of-state license plate, Kynes asked the juvenile officer Elaine Snow for a list of girls who had been taken into YDC, who had been placed in the YDC from out of state. She gave him 25 names. After days of winnowing left him with only one name. Can we guess that name? Judith Ann Neelley. He assembled pictures of a photo lineup, and while John Hancock and the woman said that Neely's photo resembled the woman who shot him, he couldn't be certain. Debbie Smith, however, recognized Neely immediately and gave Kynes the positive ID he needed, and he started searching for Neely in earnest. He didn't He didn't have a search long. On October 9th, Judy Neely was arrested in a motel in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I know where Murfreesboro is. Um, and for passing bad checks. Her husband Alvin was arrested a few days later. And on October 14th, Kynes got the word that his suspects were in custody. His satisfaction were tempered with sadness. Janice Chatman had been with the Neelys when they were arrested. Kynes was certain she was dead. Lawmen from the Rome and DeKalb County hurried to Murfreesboro, and if they expected the suspects to be guarded and evasive with their answers, they were mighty surprised. Alvin Neelley though he asked for a lawyer and waived his rights to remain silent, gave a lengthy, detailed statement that implicated Judy as the criminal mastermind sexual deviant of the pair. Politely, he explained that it was she who had planned and carried out a bombing and shooting, and it was who had killed Milligan and Chatman. He would also go on to say that she's a dangerous person and that Alvin had feared her. He he drew a map indicating the location of Chapman's body and where Judith had compelled the participation of sexual abuse of Milligan and Chapman. So while Kynes questioned Alvin, Judith was being interviewed down the hall. She repeatedly stated that she didn't need a lawyer, and any and all questions calmly and detailed, and admitted to the firebombing of Linda Adair and the shooting of Ken Doley, saying Adair had forced her to have sex with Doley after YDC, and that she had been part of a prostitution ring, um, operating out of the facility. Then, chillingly, she told of the abductions and Milligan and Chapman of what they endured in the days before the death. She would continue the confession in even more details, in that she was transported to Fort Payne and formally charged with Milligan's murder. Judy had noticed Lisa Milligan as she looked like Joni Cunningham, a character from the TV show Happy Days. Which you haven't seen Happy Days? Oh my gosh, I love Happy Days. Anyway, they were in a video arcade in the Riverbend Mall in Rome, and Judy had struck up a conversation. Lisa had gone with her willingly, and she said that because she didn't return to the Hart's home that night, they had driven 4 hours with Judy's children in the back seat. Finally checking into a motel, and the next day, she followed a similar pattern, and she would aimlessly drive during the day, at night spent at motels where Lisa slept on the floor, handcuffed to the bed frame. Hmm. Judith had been afraid, and she had, upon her release, Lisa would tell authorities where she had been, implicating Judy, and that she would be placed into YDC if it was much lit back and forth to die, for either of those didn't happen. Judith drove Lisa to the Rocky Glade, a secluded area in DeKalb County at the edge of Little River Canyon. As the children slept in the car, Judith walked Lisa over to the edge and told her to lie down. She she would admit to saying that I told her that I was going to give her a shot to put her to sleep so I could leave her and wouldn't know where I was going. Judith told authorities that she injected her with liquid Drano and left her in the left side of her neck, and that she had been quickly that she heard this was quick, undetectable way to kill, but it didn't seem to work, and Judith administered ejection to the side of Lisa's neck with liquid plumber. Lisa was still conscious. More injections followed to her and Lisa's arm and each of her buttocks. Judith waited for half an hour, and Lisa was in pain but still conscious. So Judy had her step into the edge of the canyon and turn away. Lisa begged to be taken back to the Hearth home and faced her expanse of the canyon. Pleading for her life, Judith shot her in the back. She fell backwards instead of going into the canyon, so Judith pushed her off the edge, getting blood on her jeans, and Judith changed her jeans and then threw her bloody pair of syringes into the canyon and she drove away. Her children still in the back seat. Okay, this is a very sick woman. I feel bad for these children. Like, knowing that this is your mom. As Judy confessed, authorities went looking for Janice Chatman. Her body was found where Alvin said it would be, off a back road in rural Chattanooga County, Georgia. Meanwhile, a warrant had been executed in the Murfreesboro home of Barbara Adams, Judy's mom. The Neelleys had been staying there prior to the arrest and evidence of the crime. So, what was their defense? Well, the defense, Bob French, had his work cut out for him. He had not wanted to serve in as Judy's court-appointed defense. After their first meeting, he came away disliking her intensely. Still, he would do his best. As Judy was 21, he had began by seeking youthful offender status for her, and the judge denied this motion. And then he asked a psychologist test to be administered to determine Judith's fitness for trial. The test was done January 1983, and she was found quite fit to stand trial, and with superiors no tendency to delusion or suicide. The trial will begin on March 7, 1983. In the meantime, he has set out making Judith more presentable. She had come into custody decidedly unkempt and pregnant with her third child, and French knew that he needed to get her cleaned up before she went in front of her baby. A boy was born while she awaited for her court date, and she had dental work done by Dr. Stephen Brewer, and in her attorney brought several outfits to Black's department store, the nicest ladies' clothing for the court, and she said that she'd have something to wear during the trial. Though prosecutor Richard Agnew noticed that he was preparing Judith for her court appearance, he hadn't had a clue as to what her defense would be until the first day of trial. It was evident from the sort of questionings that he had prospective jurors that he was going to try to portray her as a victim. The victim of Alvin Neelley, who was irresistible control that she had been during his time. She was 15. Let's remember that. He was still married when he married. He was still 15. So let's remember that part for a second, okay? Um, his questions center around the men's sensitivity to a woman's emotional pain. Um, and 5 men were chosen and ready to hear the evidence. Any doubt to his approach was erased in his opening statement. That every move, every act, thought he was carrying in preparation for a heinous and planned, calculated institute that was instituted by Alvin Neelley. He told Judy's story about her troubled childhood and adolescence, how she had fallen for Alvin at age 15 and left home to be with him. And within a year, he said that Alvin was beating her savagely and catered her to Alvin, and she catered his everyone, bathing him, feeding him, and eventually becoming brainwashed by him. I'm sorry, but if you're a grown man who's physically capable and mentally capable of bathing yourself, you don't need nobody else to bathe you for you. I'm sorry. Unless you are physically unable to or mentally unable to, you don't have that. No woman should ever have to do that, or no partner should ever have to do that. Among the first witnesses that the prosecution would call were two young women, teenage girls that had apparently Judith's prospective victims, Debbie Smith identified Judy as the woman who had tried to pick her up on October 4th, 1982. Susan Klontz identified Judy as the who had approached her and asked her if she was alone at Aladdin's castle at Rome at Riverbend Mall. On September 25th, the day Lisa Milligan disappeared, Diane Bobo identified Judy as the woman who had tried to go with her for a ride. The next witness, John Hancock, told the story of the abduction just as he told it before, and the prosecutor emphasized the fact that it was Judith who had done the abducting and who had eventually shot him. The first defense witness that he called was Joanne Browning. It was Neelley's first wife. She had been married to Alvin for 3 years in the mid 70s and was the mother of three of his children. Browning testified that he had beaten her throughout the marriage, even though she was pregnant, that he drugged her and raped her sister. She said that she had tried to leave several times and that Alvin had would threaten their children. She only escaped him because he had suddenly become interested in Judy, and the prosecutor damaged her credibility, though establishing she was definitely a bigamist, um, as she was married Chauncey William Browning's long before she and Alvin were divorced, and she probably as a liar was as well. Though she had claimed to be beaten around 800 times, Browning never suffered a broken bone, and though she had been pregnant for 7 months of her 3-year marriage, none of her children were damaged or beaten during the pregnancies. That afternoon, oh, that afternoon, her attorney would call Judy to the stand, and immediately her appearance and demeanor clashed with the portrayal of her as a victim. He had cleaned up. She had cleaned up nicely, no longer pregnant, at 5'10" and cut a rather imposing figure. She bantered and laughed easily at the defense table, and her mannerism was so alarming that he felt he needed to explain to the jury, when you're afraid and nervous, how do you handle that kind of fear or nervousness? Alvin's sexual advances were crude and selfish, and increasingly violent. He was instantly jealous, and I don't know where that came from. Um, he was instantly jealous. Okay, and from the start, she performed as a servant. She claimed that she bathed him and dried him, combed his hair, while he worked at jobs at the convenience stores. It was also it was she who wished to do stalking, sweeping, and mopping as well. On the last day of her testimony, which lasted 4 days, Her attorney was asking her questions about Milligan's abduction and murder. And she will go on to say that Alvin wanted a virgin. You get where I'm going with this, right? Yeah. And that she had poured him once, and she delivered Lisa to him for this use. Alvin's many sexual assaults only so as did her children, who were there the whole time. Hmm. My scientists are acting up, guys. After he was rescued, after he was sure she was dead, Judith said that he masturbated and he had ordered her to make the calls to Rome and Port Payne police, and that she had done so. Okay, why are you being? Rich, the prosecutor didn't believe her testimony at all. He had seen her and was brought to Fort Payne, and then she had been hard and cold. Though it was incredible that someone who was only 18 could be so indifferent and depraved. He quickly tried to counter his method and established a fence. Why are you? Finally, the prosecutor took through the events of the night that took place at the edge of Little River, and because Al told Judith to claim, because Al told me to. Judy claimed the only thing she did to her own was eat and go to the bathroom. He would redirect Her attorney would redirect it and convincing the jury of the claim. The prosecutor called the doctor. Um, no, that came from, and he would and his last witness, and he was the last witness to be called. His closing arguments took 2 hours, and it was sweeping and it was bizarre. Now it is time for the sentencing. Judge Random Cole charged the jury at 4:30 p.m. on March 21st. By 10:45 the next morning, they had reached a verdict. Judith Ann Neelley was found guilty of murder and abduction. In August of 1984, a woman told the police in Murfreesboro that she had been abducted by a couple. Y'all, my laptop is going crazy. I don't know why. Over the years, Judy's case would wind up through a mini appeals process, and while America debated the case where Carla Faye Tucker should be executed in Texas, Judy quietly moved closer to execution. The Supreme Court denied her final appeal. Judy claimed that some sort of conversion had happened, and it was her through good faith and good fortune, and the governor was just such a fundamentalist. Bob James had a reputation for himself of being the. Alright, guys, that's it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.